Hello, I'm Ed,
And I'm Ben.
and this is What About Porridge? Welcome back. It's What About Porridge? It's the podcast where we're taking a gentle stroll through the pastoral idyll of health and nutrition. I'll be asking all the questions that pop into my head, and I'll be ensuring that I get serious answers from Ben, our nutritional therapist, spirit guide. So what are we talking about today, Ben? What's on the agenda?
Well, for those of you that can remember this far back, at the end of the last show, I said that we were going to talk about healthy aging. So in this episode, we're going to cover 10 things that you can do to slow your rate of aging.
And make sure you listen to the end because the last one will shock you.
But don't tune in every week like our theme tune says, because
This is a poor show. It's been, I think, 4 months since our last episode.
I think at least 4 months. Yeah.
But it's going to be 4 months of goodness that we've saved up.
Do you think it's going to be worth it?
Yeah, 100%. This episode is going to be 4 times better than the last one. What snacks have you got to keep you fueled during this episode?
Well, I'm sipping Valerian tea, but I've eaten all the snacks. There were copious snacks, though. I had dark chocolate with, what was the stuff? I literally can't even remember what I've eaten today. I had dark chocolate with cherries melted into it, and then I made some cookie dough with tiger nut flour, and I ate that, which was delicious. So, yeah.
Is this a sort of is that what you would recommend that other people do? Is this a kind of do what I say, not what I do kind of situation?
No comment. I think we should maybe just get on with the show.
All right, let's go.
All right, so let's get into it. Actually, just before we get into it, I want to hit you with a Christmas quiz, because although it's nowhere near Christmas, by the time we get this episode out, it blatantly will be the Christmas episode. So,
perfect.
This question comes from one of the special Christmas episodes of University Challenge a couple of years ago. And basically, my family take it quite seriously, and we enter ourselves as a team every year, and my mum keeps score and everything, which is hilarious. But I think this is pretty much the only question I got right. So the question is, what is the name of the chemical reaction that takes place between amino acids and reducing sugars that gives browned food, such as seared steaks and roast chicken, its distinctive flavor?
Oh man, I think I might actually know this one. Is this the
You're not allowed to spoil it for people. I'm going to tell you the answer
right.
At the end of the episode.
I was. Oh, okay. I thought I was answering the Christmas quiz. Normally, you sort of spring.
I do normally
unexpected
spring questions on me. You. Yeah.
Oh, fine. Okay. All right. Well, I think I know what the answer is. I'm going to write it down, and then at the end, when we reveal the answer, everyone will get to know whether I was right.
Perfect.
Thrilling. Okay. Excellent.
As a reminder, before we start, nothing in this podcast should be considered medical advice.
Yes, very important. Okay, so you said that the topic is about slowing your rate of aging. So that can be very interesting. And have we got a case study to talk about today as well?
Well, the case study is actually me, but this is an area I'm going to focus on quite a lot in the future with my clinic work. So we're going to have more case studies in the future, hopefully. So we should probably return to this topic in the future.
Love it. But you've been experimenting on yourself.
Always.
Okay, cool. That's going to be really good. All right. So I'm going to suggest that when we're talking about this topic, it probably makes sense for listeners to assume that this is going to be stuff that goes on top of the kind of things that we've already talked about in previous episodes, right? So we don't want to end up just repeating things that we've said already. So there's a lot that we've talked about in terms of good diet and lifestyle in previous episodes that already supports health and longevity. So this is going to be new stuff that just, kind of assumes you've got all that dialed in already. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to assume that's the case. And that means eating a diet that's focused on nutrient-dense whole foods that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But although we're assuming that is the starting point, there's still a lot of work to do to educate people as to what a healthy diet actually is. And I had a consultation with somebody recently who said to me they eat a very healthy diet. So I was preparing myself to be impressed. But the next thing they said was, I hardly eat any meat, but eat plenty of bread and pasta.
That's good.
So
So what? Yeah, what was your reaction to that?
don't even go there.
I'm
So
imagining Ben flat face, just sort of kind of completely horizontal mouth.
I mean, we just need to be clear with people that the starting point for anyone wanting to be healthy and live a long time is a diet that is what I call species appropriate. And that basically means that it's a paleo type diet that excludes modern foods like cereal grains and vegetable oils and all that kind of stuff. And I think this is definitely the starting point for anyone with a niggly health problem, like maybe you've got gut issues or migraines, or you experience period pains or skin problems, or maybe even just have problems maintaining a healthy body weight. If any of those apply to you, your starting point has to be this sort of paleo diet template. And then once you've done that for 6 months, let's say, then you can start introducing things like dairy and legumes and the occasional pizza and just see what happens. But I don't think anyone should assume that they tolerate these foods, because in my experience, a lot of people don't, and they just aren't thriving. And the reason they're not thriving is that we're not designed to eat these foods. And, by designed, I mean, obviously all of that natural selection stuff. But the other thing that we should talk about, Ed, is the language that we use around food. And we should be really clear about when something is good for us and when it's not. And we shouldn't.
Oh yeah, we talked about this. Have we done this in a previous episode? I really like this distinction between treats and cheats, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we have talked about it in a previous episode. So let's just quickly cover it, because I think it's important context, right? So we shouldn't call takeaway fish and chips and Haribo treats, which is what most people call them, because a treat is something that's good for you. And in my mind, these are cheats, as you say, Ed. So, these are things that you can get away with occasionally because you're healthy and resilient. But a meal like takeaway fish or chips is going to be cooked in some sort of industrial seed oil. It's going to be coated in white flour. And we know that these foods promote inflammation in the body and are harmful in, myriad ways that we don't need to get into. And so for me, it's about the idea of being mindful of the accumulation of insults. And when you think about it in those terms, it's really easy to treat yourself to ill health and early death. You could, and the language on genuinely
special treat.
The language we use around this is crazy. Like, I'm going to treat myself to something that's actively harmful. So we just shouldn't use that language. And, don't get me wrong, I eat fish and chips occasionally and it tastes amazing. And I think that every meal should taste amazing. But we just shouldn't call foods that are actively harmful by the wrong term. And we should be clear about the foods that are nourishing to our bodies.
Fair enough. So instead of your next fish and chips, next time you want a treat, consider instead some cherries soaked in dark chocolate.
Definitely. Oh my God, they're so good. It's crazy. Right, should we go back to the topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So we'll try not to go down too many rabbit holes. What this topic is really about is the difference between chronological age and biological age. And even more crucially, it's about the rate at which you age. And the good news is that your rate of aging is highly modifiable. And that's the whole point of this episode.
Okay, so what does that? Yeah, obviously you can't change your chronological age. But so how do you kind of define age then?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it's one that most people have never really thought about. So I think the assumption is that there's no difference between chronological age and biological age, or people have just never really thought about it.
Yeah.
But they're actually totally different things. So one is how long you've been on the planet, and the other is how old are your cells and your tissues and your organs. And when you dive into the science of this subject, you realize that that's actually what matters. And so one way to think about this is when you first meet somebody, you're likely to make some sort of judgment about them based on their appearance. So, for example, you might notice that they have glowing, radiant skin, or you'll notice something about their physique or how they hold themselves, or, 100 other things. But they all influence how old you think they are. So let's say you see someone playing tennis or skiing and they look graceful and strong. What you're judging has nothing to do with their chronological age. You're making a judgment based on their biological age.
Yeah.
Because that's what you see. So
I quite like. I mean, this was something I came across the other day actually on a YouTube video, and the person was saying something similar, but taking a kind of really extreme position to illustrate it. Was just saying, if you had two people standing next to each other or sitting next to each other, one is a 6-month-old baby and the other's a 90-year-old, everyone will know which is which, and you don't need to verify their birth certificates or something to know. You don't need to know the chronological age in order to verify who's who. And I guess there's then and the markers that tell you which is which are the same markers that then apply in less extreme versions of that experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And this is actually going to become more significant as we develop, because when we have really advanced technology available, some people are going to opt to be enhanced by robotics and all sorts of things like that, which, is going to make this whole thing really, really hard.
Because I guess there is, though, a difference between being biologically young and healthy versus just appearing to be. I guess I imagine that you're not saying that, for example, appearing to have really good skin by, I don't know, using Botox is the same as actually being healthy.
Right. And you get into things like, well, the advantages of makeup and, those kinds of things. Yeah, I'm definitely not talking about that.
Okay.
So before we get to the 10 things, let's quickly recap on the 12 diet and lifestyle things that we've talked about in episode 4, and you'll see why that's relevant in a minute. So these are all the things we've said that you have to dial in and focus on if you want to be healthy and live a long time. So you have diet, sleep, exercise, movement, stress management, toxic exposure, or rather the need to avoid toxins, sunlight exposure, which is about getting the right dose of sunshine but not getting burnt. So that's a U-shaped curve. Social support, factors that influence the gut microbiome, play, time spent in nature, and your system of thoughts and beliefs. And that last one is something that I've been researching a lot recently, so we might return to that in a future podcast at some point. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that really. That would definitely be a good one to dive into.
So the importance of getting these basics right was shown in a piece in the journal Circulation, which concluded that just doing the 5 basic healthy habits, which they've identified as a healthy diet, regular physical activity, maintaining a healthy body weight, not smoking, and moderating alcohol consumption, would increase life expectancy in women by 14 years and men by 12 years. So these are just the foundational elements to all of this stuff. So, and I don't even agree
pretty
with
clearly those 5 things map onto your 12 things quite easily, don't they?
Yeah. And I don't even agree with their definition of a healthy diet. So
yeah.
It literally says low in red meat.
Eating plenty of pasta and bread.
Absolutely. Right. So let's get into the 10 list of things that you can do to slow your rate of aging. Number 1 is exercise, but specifically it's high intensity interval training, which is known as HIIT. And it's basically the kind of exercise where you do something very intense in short bursts, and then you have sort of rest periods. So you might sprint really fast for a minute and then jog slowly for a minute. And then you would repeat that 5 or 6 times.
Okay, that is not what I thought you were going to say. That's very interesting. Yeah, no, I thought you were going to say resistance training, as in weightlifting.
Ah, okay. Well, we'll come to that in a minute then. So this form of exercise has been shown to reverse the age-related decline in mitochondrial function by up to 69%. And that's significant because mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the 9 hallmarks of aging.
And just remind us what sort of mitochondrial function is.
So mitochondria are the organelles. You're gonna like, what's a good description of this? They're the
This is Ben struggling not to say mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell.
yeah, which I've already said on a previous episode. Like, that's what everyone says, isn't it?
Yeah, that's your like GCSE biology answer.
Yeah.
I don't know what that actually means.
I mean, they're classed as organelles, which are like a type of teeny weeny organ, and there are, hundreds or thousands of them that live in every cell, and they basically provide our energy at a cellular level. So it gets incredibly complicated into the weeds when you start exploring what mitochondria are.
Well, I mean, tell me, if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, why would you care about that?
Oh, well, you would experience low energy and poor recovery from exercise, and you would just feel fatigued pretty much all the time.
Right. And so this is something, so you said age-related decline in mitochondrial function. So that's just something that you perhaps would just expect, that the function declines over time as you get older, but that you can use this high-intensity interval training to reverse it.
Exactly right. So when you start to improve mitochondrial turnover, it directly slows biological aging. And mitochondrial turnover, just to explain that, is the continuous process of replacing old or damaged mitochondria with new ones, and that maintains the health of the cell.
Nice.
So what's interesting is that this high intensity interval training was shown to have this effect much more so than regular strength training, which is what you thought I was going to say, or steady state cardio, when you just sort of run on a treadmill for 20 minutes at the same rate. Interestingly here also is that exercise is one of the best things you can do for cancer treatment and for cancer prevention. And given that cancer is the second biggest cause of death, it's worth mentioning in the context of living longer.
Yeah, for sure.
So essentially, when you exercise, you trigger the production of specialist immune cells that can go out and kill cancer. And they're things like cytotoxic lymphocytes and natural killer cells. But cancer is actually a topic we're going to return to at some point and do properly.
All right. So just before we move on to the next one, then, if someone wanted to do some high intensity interval training, how would they know they're doing it, or where would you recommend that someone start with that if, let's say, at the moment they're doing steady state jogging every now and then?
That's a good question. I mean, you certainly need a base level of fitness to launch into this. But let's say you're jogging or rowing or doing some kind of fitness training on quite a regular basis. You would start with 2 or 3 cycles of this, and you would just go flat out to whatever it is you consider your maximum, whether it's rowing or running, for maybe 30 seconds. Not even that, because if you've ever tried to sprint absolutely flat out, even maintaining 20 seconds is pretty hard. And then you would drop down to a slow jog or a slow pace of rowing again. Just do it 2 or 3 times the first time out and just see how you feel. But the important thing is that you bounce back from it, and you recover well from it. And we'll talk about why that's important in a minute.
Shout out as well to the excellent game of rugby fives that everyone should consider playing, because like squash, it, I think, gives you some of these benefits. It's one of those things where you have to go to maximum and go kind of beyond maximum into the anaerobic state to during particularly intense rallies or something, and then you can kind of slow the game down or rest a little bit between rallies.
Yeah, absolutely. The key thing about it is when you're at this tempo you absolutely should not be able to hold a conversation. You can barely do anything else.
Oh, that's okay. That's a good test. Yeah. So if you're
running with a friend,
yeah,
and
exactly.
you're having a conversation, you're way below the tempo you need to be at.
Although as you say, you only need to be at that tempo for a really short period of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
what else we got?
Number two is fasting, which can also be categorized as time-restricted eating or something called fasting mimicking diets. So it's been shown that periodic fasting can reduce biomarkers of aging, as well as reduce incidence of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So you get these benefits because fasting upregulates a process called autophagy, which literally means self-eating. And it's basically where the body goes around and it kills off wonky cells. And it can't do this if it's diverting energy to digestion, because digesting food is actually...
wonky cells, that's an official scientific term, is it?
Absolutely. I think that's in the literature.
Good. Yeah.
We'll include a citation. So the important thing here is that digesting food is metabolically very expensive. And if you're eating and your body has to do digestion, you can't upregulate cellular repair. It's not going to kick off autophagy. But it's been shown that if you do a 3-month, 5-day fasting mimicking diet, you can reduce IGF-1, which is an important biomarker that's central to aging pathways, by 11%. So it doesn't sound like much, but when you do fasting...
what would count as a fasting mimicking diet?
So you would bring, for those 5 days during your week, you would bring your calorie intake down to maybe, let's say, 500 calories a day, but they would be very carefully crafted calories. So you're still trying to get as many nutrients in your body as possible, keep insulin low, and things like that. So you are providing the body with minimum nutrition and not trying to put too much burden on digestion.
For 5 days, and then for 2 you'd be eating a normal amount, and then you'd kind of repeat that cycle for 3 months.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's also worth saying that fasting improves metabolic flexibility and a ton of biomarkers related to just metabolic health in generally. And it's the key to being able to skip meals without being hangry, in inverted commas. So yeah, it's a really key thing. It's basically, we evolved this mechanism to survive, and then we don't use it anymore typically. But it's just very clearly beneficial to engage this mechanism on a very regular basis. So
what's your take on full-on fasting? As in, so you've talked about fasting and mimicking where you are still eating something. Like, what about people who do these, just drink water for X period of time?
Well, I'll tell you what,
7 days.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I think is a good recipe for this, which is you start with time-restricted eating or time-restricting feeding, where you would skip breakfast and try and get to sort of maybe a 17-hour fasting period before you break your fast. And you might do that 2-3 days a week. And you get to a point where you're comfortable doing that routinely. And that would mean you would probably need to become quite sort of what you would call fat adapted. You would develop this metabolic flexibility so that your body can burn fat, and then you're not hungry. It's not really a big deal to skip a meal. So that would be your kind of starting point. And then maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks, you would do 24 hours. And during that 24 hours, you'd just drink water, and then you would resume normal meals. And that's a really good starting point. When you start getting into longer fasts, there are a lot more considerations. And I'm sure there are good resources out there about, if you want to go for 3 days, what are some of the things you need to be mindful of? And one of the things you would need to be mindful of with any of this is fasting when you're very stressed is probably not a good idea, because fasting is in and of itself a stressor for the body. I think it's also worth saying here that I think there's benefit to feasting, which is going to be an odd thing to say. But basically, I think that every now and again, it's beneficial to send a signal to the body that food is abundant and that it doesn't have to worry. And I've been doing quite a few feasting days recently, including today. No, I actually lost quite a lot of weight at the end of the summer due to stress and a lack of sleep. And I got down to well below 10% body fat, kind of by accident. So I've been feasting, building myself back up. So
nice. Yeah. I mean, keeping in mind your, very kind comments earlier about fish and chips, like when you're feasting, is that what are your considerations? How are you choosing what to eat on feast day?
Oh, I'm definitely not feasting on junk.
Okay.
Especially as I'm trying to when I say that I'm trying to regain weight, I'm not trying to regain body fat. I could just sit and eat Ben and Jerry's and do that quite easily.
Yeah, that's a fair point, isn't it? So it's you want to not just fat, right?
Well, it's another point where we need to be really clear about the language we use, because when people say they want to lose weight, they don't mean they want to lose bone or muscle. They mean they want to lose body fat. Okay, so moving on to number 3 then, which is strength training, which is all about maintaining muscle and metabolic health.
Okay, all right. So I wasn't wrong then.
You weren't wrong.
This was what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, interestingly, muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of longevity, especially in older adults. So if you are doing strength training to maintain muscle mass, then it prevents sarcopenia, it improves insulin sensitivity, supports mitochondria function that we just talked about. And resistance training has been shown to reduce inflammatory cytokines and lower some of the markers for biological aging. And there's more and more research coming out about that. So I'm sure if you want to dive into that, you can listen to a 2-hour episode of Huberman, which we'll link to in the show notes.
All right, so it's sort of a very shallow rabbit hole, almost just a rabbit dip. What's an inflammatory cytokine?
Oh, Christ. I'm not allowed to say Christ, am I?
I'll allow. But okay, I mean, you can just say it's a bad thing. You can Google it.
Yeah, it's a bad thing. You can Google it. No, these are markers of inflammation in the body, and in response to resistance training, you'll get an inflammatory effect. So we'll come back and explain what these inflammatory markers are in a minute.
Okay.
So moving on to number 4. Number 4 is heat therapy or saunas. So essentially this is cardiovascular exercise in disguise, because sauna use is associated with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. So there's a really interesting study that shows that if you have 4 to 7 sauna sessions a week, it can reduce all-cause mortality by 40%.
Blimey.
And that's the marker that really matters, right? There's no point in reducing cardiovascular disease if it increases something else. But sauna is associated with the reduction in cardiovascular disease, specifically because of what I just said, which is that you're increasing your heart rate when you're exposed to this heat. And that leads us nicely on to the next one.
Well, hold on. Am I allowed to cut in?
Go on.
So just to add, because you've added the actual scientific research, so let me kind of add value by talking about YouTube videos I've once seen. I saw a YouTube video last week about a guy who was doing a lot of sauna and monitoring his biomarkers at the same time to just see basically what happened. Was the research borne out in his particular example? And the thing that was interesting about it was, at least for him, he found really big improvements in his health markers. But because he was already doing a lot of exercise, that was interesting, because it was, I mean, like where you said it's cardiovascular exercise in disguise, I guess that's sort of true, but it seemed from his results anyway that sauna stacks on, that it has additional benefit on top of exercise. So even if you're already getting a lot of exercise, sauna is still beneficial on top of that, which I thought was, kind of interesting.
So this is Bryan Johnson, who did a 90-day sauna experiment.
That's the one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes.
pushing it maybe to call it an experiment, or it's just him. So there's no control group or anything, but
right.
But yeah.
It's N of 1, but he is referred to as the world's most studied human or something, the world's most measured human.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting.
Even
if it doesn't prove anything about anyone else, but it gives you I think a pretty strong indication of what you might choose to experiment on for yourself.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to number 5. So number 5 is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's cold exposure. So we're talking about things like cold showers and ice baths and stuff like that. Cold exposure improves mitochondrial efficiency and has been shown to reduce inflammation and boost metabolic health. So one of the mechanisms is that it activates brown adipose tissue and improves glucose and insulin sensitivity. So they did an 11-week study where they combined cold exposure. Apparently, even 11 minutes a week of cold exposure through ice baths or showers can have measurable metabolic effects.
So yeah, I mean, like, how cold do you think it needs to be? Is that just, turn the shower cold at the end of your shower kind of thing, or?
I mean, I guess if it's 11 minutes a week, you could do it for, just 2-3 minutes a day would be fine. I don't know that you want to stay very much longer than that in an ice bath anyway, but I'm sure Brian's done an experiment on this. I don't know the answer to that. We'll need to dig further into it in a future episode.
Sounds good.
So interestingly, these first 5 things have something in common. They are all forms of hormetic stimulus, and hormesis is basically a small dose of stress that triggers a net positive adaptive response that basically makes you stronger or more resilient. So the principle is that a low dose of stress activates repair, regeneration, and basically defensive pathways. And a high dose of stress, or one that's sort of too high, becomes damaging. So it's about the sweet spot between enough stress to nudge adaptation, but not so much that it overwhelms recovery. So exercise is probably the clearest example of hormesis, and things like resistance training and CrossFit, what they really are forms of controlled damage. And the goal is to induce just the right amount of micro tears, oxidative stress, and energy depletion. And then, if your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, and it has the raw materials, your body responds by strengthening various systems so that basically next time you experience that same stressor or a similar stressor, it feels much smaller. You're able to just cope with it much better. And longevity research now frames resistance training, fasting, heat exposure, cold exposure, and things like phytochemicals and hypoxia. They're all forms of hormetic stimuli. And the
hypoxia is like holding your breath, you mean?
Yeah, it's oxygen reduction, essentially. Yeah, and so the mechanisms involved include mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the creation of new, more efficient mitochondria, autophagy, which is what we talked about, so recycling of damaged cell components, anti-inflammatory signaling, the activation of DNA repair pathways, and improved metabolic flexibility, which is what we said about the ability to switch between fuel sources. So yeah, the key point here is just don't get too comfortable. I mean, humans evolved under intermittent stressors, so the body uses them as an important signal to get stronger. So in my view, you just shouldn't sit on the train if you don't have to, and you should carry your heavy bag up the hill, and you should be happy that you're getting stronger as a result. So yeah, if you get too comfortable, you die. We should put that on our Instagram.
Yeah, or make a t-shirt.
Perfect. So number 6. Right. It is about minimizing exposure to environmental toxins. because we know that heavy metals, air pollution, and endocrine disruptors directly increase oxidative stress. So all of these things are associated with accelerated epigenetic aging. It's been shown that people in high pollution areas show a 2-year additional biological age.
Wow.
So it adds 2 years to their biological age due to that pollution. So yeah, it's quite significant. So moving on then, number 7.
We should put a thing, we were exchanging links before the episode from, I think it was the Financial Times article about lead contamination in the agriculture system that was really scary. We should put that in the show notes.
Let's definitely do that. Yeah, that is pretty scary. So number 7 is about cognitive challenge and lifelong learning. Learning and constantly challenging your brain is about novelty, and novelty drives neuroplasticity, and engaging in cognitively stimulating activities is associated with slower cognitive decline. So it's basically use your brain or you start to lose that function. And research shows that regular complex mental activity can reduce your dementia risk by up to 48%.
Blimey.
I mean, that's just stunning. So
what counts as a complex mental activity?
I mean, playing chess or
doing a tax return.
I mean, probably doing. Yeah.
Okay, but so you think? I mean, that sounds like potentially there's some truth in these, adverts that we all get sent constantly about, brain training games and quizzes and things.
Yeah.
What else you got for us?
Number 8 is modulating the gut microbiome. So that's hardly a surprise. That was definitely coming up in the list because the gut microbiome plays a key role in regulating inflammation, immune function, metabolic health, and they're all tightly coupled with aging. So we've talked about this before, but dysbiosis, which is basically microbial imbalance in the gut, is associated with a term called inflammaging, which is where it's been shown that chronic low-grade inflammation accelerates biological aging. And there's lots of research on this. And where they're at now is playing around with things like probiotics and prebiotics and like advanced microbiome therapeutics, which is what they're referred to in the literature, aimed specifically at modulating the gut microbiome to overcome some of this stuff. So,
and as a reminder, because we've talked about this before, but dysbiosis, this is stuff like basically an overgrowth of specific microbes in the gut, so maybe yeasts or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, and you're typically talking about the large intestine should have a symbiotic balance between, beneficial bacteria and what are potentially harmful bacteria. And when you get out of that symbiosis, that's just called dysbiosis. So right. Exactly right, Ed. Yeah. And the research is getting really interesting because, so for example, a 2020 study found a causal association between specific gut bacteria and human longevity. And there's been various studies now where they've supplemented people with specific probiotics, and it's improved measures for frailty and improved metrics around systemic inflammation and so on. So you can do a lot to modulate the effects of a messed up gut microbiome and bring it back into healthy symbiosis.
Amazing.
So a sort of an obvious example of this would be the dark chocolate example. So the polyphenols in that are really beneficial. They would fall under the heading of a microbiome-based therapeutic. And at the other end of the spectrum, you'd have an intervention like a fecal microbiome transplant.
I knew you were going to get onto this.
That's definitely not a topic for today. But, there are people that are struggling with chronic conditions like a particular thing called Clostridium difficile, which is a particularly virulent, nasty form of microbe that lives in the gut. And they found that if you just replace somebody's gut microbiome in its entirety, via this fecal microbiome transplant, you can cure people of these particularly nasty pathogens. So it is pretty interesting.
Yeah, amazing. Makes
So
for
number
good
9,
headlines as well.
absolutely. So number 9 is about building and protecting social connection. So we talked before about the 2010 study that showed that weak social ties carry a mortality risk compared to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is pretty stunning. But we know from lots of different research that social isolation accelerates aging via cortisol pathways and inflammation. And the big statistic is that loneliness increases the risk of early death by 26%.
God, it's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah. So number 10 is an interesting one, omega-3. So there's new clinical trial evidence showing that you can slow biological age and your rate of aging just by taking an omega-3 supplement. And what's interesting is that if you then add to that vitamin D and exercise, the three interventions together have an additive effect. So the example in some of the studies is you take 1 gram a day of omega-3, and that's slowed biological aging by 2.9 to 3.8 months over a 3-year trial. So quite a significant impact. But then they found that if you add 2,000 international units a day of vitamin D, and then you do an exercise program, that slowing of your epigenetic aging was much greater. And they used some biological clocks to show that, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And just to insert something on this topic, there's a Harvard study that lists not eating seafood as one of the 6 most preventable causes of death, right up there with smoking. And that's because of these omega-3 long-chain fatty acids, which are EPA and DHA, which we've talked about before. So anyone avoiding seafood and fish for any reason, that's a serious problem that you have to address. But what they're saying here is you can address it by just taking a couple of grams a day of a high quality fish oil.
Yeah, or as we've talked about in previous episode where we were doing our vegan meal plan, you can now get vegan EPA, DHA, omega-3 supplements sourced from, what's it called?
Microalgae.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So not the ALA flaxseed oil supplements, but the EPA, DHA algae ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just have some concluding thoughts on our list then. As we've said before, this is about increasing health span. And I recently read the book Outlive, which is The Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. And he's a prominent person in this field who talks about longevity. And he talks about how medicine 2.0 waits for disease to happen. But medicine 3.0, which is the future, is about preventing disease. And that's really what this is all about. And one quote from the book, which is a nice segue into our conclusion, is that strength is the most important physical trait for aging well. So there are lots of things that you can measure for, getting really scientific about your rate of aging. But one of them is just grip strength. So it's quite interesting. So let's talk about other ways.
I also read this book, right, on your recommendation, and I do think this is quite a nice sort of more accessible way of thinking about biological age than, so obviously the kind of blood and biomarkers really important, but a lot of what he talks about is just when you're 80, would you like to be able to get down onto the floor on your hands and knees and play with your grandchildren and then be able to stand up again? And if you would like to be able to do that, then there's a certain amount of muscular strength that is required to achieve that. And if you want that at 80, then you're going to need a certain amount at 50 or at 40 in order to be kind of trending towards that goal at 80, which I thought was just, it's quite a nice alternative way of looking at it.
Yeah, it is interesting because you can measure things like resting heart rate or C-reactive protein and all these kinds of things. But as you say, you just want some fairly basic measures. In the book Life Force, they talk about the ability to get up off the floor without using your hands. And it's amazing how many people can't do that. It's really interesting.
Are you allowed to use your knees? Because there's that thing where people just stand up. Like, I can't do that. Maybe I should be able to.
You are allowed to use your knees. Yeah, I'm not. Oh, and we'll need to have a video version of this podcast, and you'll have to demonstrate what you're talking about.
No, obviously you're allowed to. Obviously, you're allowed to like straighten your legs using your knees. I'm saying, are you allowed to put your knees onto the ground?
I think you are. Yeah. I don't know the detail. Anyway, so let's briefly talk about some of the ways that you can measure some of this stuff. So actually, one of the strongest predictors of lifespan is VO2 max. It's actually the top modifiable predictor of long-term survival. So as an example, and this comes from the book Life Force, if you move from the bottom 25% of VO2 max to the top 25% of VO2 max, it reduces all-cause mortality by roughly 5 times. So it's pretty huge. So higher VO2 max equates to slower biological aging, basically. And obviously,
again, I guess that's back to the point about high intensity interval training as well. It's got to be a VO2 max thing.
Absolutely. And so you could get a wearable device to measure this, or go to some fancy gym where they'd have some testing equipment. So, but it's not as easy as resting heart rate or grip strength. And so that's it. That's the list.
Super interesting. As a roundup, then, just for our listeners who might be interested in trying some of this stuff out for themselves, what's the, if you had to pick one method of measuring your biological age so that you're kind of baselining it before you started doing any of these things, or to see how impactful they are, how would you recommend people go about doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the obvious one is to measure your VO2 max as a baseline, do some of these interventions, and then see if it's increased. Ideally, you'd want to do VO2 max, grip strength, and you could even do waist to height ratio or resting heart rate. Some of these you can just do for free, so you may as well do a whole bunch. Other ones you have to, go to your GP or get a checkup. So HbA1c is quite a useful biomarker. That's looking at your glucose in the blood, and that's actually quite closely correlated with your rate of aging. And then if you really want to spend money and go for the gold standard for doing this, you have to do a test that looks at genetics, specifically epigenetics. And I've done a test called True Age, which is by a company called True Diagnostics, who are not a sponsor of the show.
Not yet.
But it's an epigenetic test that analyzes patterns for DNA methylation, and it costs about £460. And that can tell you your biological age very precisely and your pace of aging.
Okay, well, yeah, that's brilliant. And that's probably quite a nice segue into the case study, right? Because you've started, talking about one of the tests that I think you did on yourself, right?
Yeah, so the test that I did was called True Age. And basically you take a small blood sample from a finger prick blood test, and then the lab analyze it, and they look for patterns in methylation markers in your DNA. So you can think of DNA as being like an instruction manual, like a recipe book for your body, and it doesn't change. But epigenetics, you can think of as like the on-off switches for your genes, and they do change. They're basically chemical tags called methyl groups that stick to your DNA and tell your body which genes to use and which ones to ignore. And they're influenced by your environment and your lifestyle and sleep and stress and all the things that we just talked about. And so if you do a test like this True Age test, it can use advanced algorithms and analyze these epigenetic clocks. And essentially it can tell you the age of your specific organ systems, which is pretty interesting. And it can highlight areas where your rate of aging might be accelerated. So you actually know where to intervene with a particular intervention, or one of the suggestions in the list. So it might say your digestive system is aging much faster than you would like. So then you can target your efforts around that.
Yeah. So how did you get on?
Well, I'm not going to go into this very much, but I've done a bunch of things over the past few years, and I've slowed my rate of aging to 0.77, which means I age at 77% of the rate of a normal person, let's say.
So in 10 years' time, you'll be seven years older.
Yeah, my body will only be
7.7
years older, yeah. But the way that I like to think about it is that for the first 84 days of the year, I don't age at all. and that gives me free reign to do whatever I like.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's when you get all your feasting done.
Absolutely. So the interesting thing is that, like I said at the beginning, this is highly modifiable, and it's actually possible to slow your rate of aging way more. And we've already talked about Bryan Johnson. He's probably the most famous example of somebody who's slowed their rate of aging. And he's managed to achieve 0.48. And that's based on the same epigenetic clocks that I used. So yeah, that's an extreme example of, if you're really willing to go the distance, you can slow your rate of aging dramatically. And earlier this year, I was playing around with an app that he's developed, which is called the Don't Die app. And Ed and I were doing some of the physical exercise challenges that help you calculate your biological age, which is quite a fun, free thing that you can do. So you can challenge yourself, and one of them is grip strength. It's how long can you hang from a bar. So there's all sorts in there. It's quite good fun.
Did you have a before and after, or is your 0.77 score, is that just like after a lot of interventions?
I don't have a before and after, but I'm going to do another one at some point, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
And I'm about to work with a client who specifically wants to target this. And with them, I'm going to suggest that they do a before and after. And if they can't afford an epigenetic test, then we'll do stuff like HbA1c and resting heart rate and stuff.
That would be really interesting. If the client is up for being included in a case study, that would be a really interesting one to do, I think.
Yeah. All right. So shall we answer the quiz question?
Oh yeah. So what was I've forgotten the question now.
Okay, the question is, what is the chemical process that occurs when amino acids and certain sugars are heated?
Yeah, there was something more to it than that, but yeah. Okay,
no, I've shortened it, but
that was a good enough reminder. This was my guess is it's called the Maynard reaction.
That's quite close. It's actually called the Maillard reaction.
Oh, it's basically fine.
It basically creates hundreds of compounds that give browned food like an amazing flavor and smell. The classic one being the gooey bits of bacon that you scrape off the oven dish. And it's basically the reason that pigs in blankets are the best part of the Christmas meal. And people that really understand cooking and chemistry take advantage of this a lot, because you can just put basic chicken, literally just, pieces of chicken thigh in the oven with a bit of oil. And if you cook it at the right temperature and you do it right, it just comes out delicious because of the Maillard reaction. So there you go.
Very good. Nice Christmas quiz.
If it comes up on University Challenge, you'll be sorted.
Yeah. All right. Well, was that everything? Any final thoughts?
I don't think I've got final thoughts. But in the next episode, I'm going to talk about the metabolic reset program that I've been piloting, which is primarily about improving metabolic health by improving body composition. And it's closely related to today's topic, because being overweight is strongly correlated with lots of different types of cancers, 13 different types of cancers, I seem to recall. And it's actually been estimated that 11% of cancers are women are linked to being overweight. So, yeah, it's a big one.
Very good. Okay, that'll be quite interesting.
Mm.
And I think we also said that we were going to do a segment at some point on sport nutrition, kind of athletic performance and recovery.
I think that'd be a brilliant topic to cover, yeah. And I'm also keen to do a deep dive on cardiovascular disease at some point, and more specifically heart attack and stroke, which is a topic that's quite close to home for me right now. And I just want to talk about why the diet heart hypothesis is total nonsense, and explain what really does cause heart attack and strokes. And that will be an opportunity to have a really good rant about that.
Perfect. I'll look forward to that. All right. Well, hopefully it's not going to be another 4 months before our next episode. Let's do better.
Yeah, let's do our best. So yeah, that's it.
Very nice. See you
we
soon.
made it. So I don't know why I made that noise. We can edit that out.
I'm keeping it. I'm going to edit it into all sorts of other places.